I'm in a really interesting, fortunate position where I am the owner and managing director of Cattle Essential, and as you said, offering that end-to-end kind of business service to my clients, and with a very strong human resources focus. And we obviously implement the HR framework to really, create that culture and an environment that really helps empower workforces and help people thrive. I'm also the founding partner and chief vision officer for Exodus Tech, which builds, SaaS programs or software as a service programs. So we've already, got Job Activator in the market in Australia, and we're currently building our own HR software and everything as well. So in and around this space, it's a massive passion area for me. And I'm the example of someone who can cross-skill. I'm, 15 years into human resources, and 2 years ago went, everything's going in this IT tech direction. That's where I want to go. So I'm, started a company in that space, and here I am, 2.5 years later, and I'm launching my own software, or I'm about to launch my second software. So, it's definitely a growing field, which really is there we go, which is really kind of the main element of your industry outlook when it comes to this, and why it is such a great field to get into. When you have a look at globally, we're expecting to need 5 million technology workers, and this is all encompassing. The IDC is saying we're going to need 5 million technology workers by 2027. And if you think about the fact that that's only 5 years away, that's an additional million people globally that we need to employ in order to fill the demand that exists within this space. And really that comes down to the fact that everything is going to be AI assisted. It's going to be cloud linked, which basically means everything's going to be online. 75% of enterprises just within Australia, New Zealand, we're talking publicly listed companies, are going to be using AI assisted technologies. That's going to be to control all of their governance services, managing and optimizing the way in which they use their resources, their systems. But what I find really interesting in and around this space, not to jump ahead my slides or anything like that, is the fact that augmentation and, virtual reality and moving into that augmented end-to-end business service is actually where it's going. So where previously automation's been the way, and yes, there's been robotics and coding, and in a much simpler form, we've seen technology speed up to such an extent that in such a short amount of time, we're moving into this augmented reality that is really fundamentally reshaping business. Estimated that 70% of the workforce is going to be working remotely by 2025. Even with COVID, it's 1 in 6 workers at the moment can work remotely. You've still actually got a fifth or sixth, no, 5/6. I'm terrible at maths. Good at HR, good at coding, terrible at maths. But people, you still need people to construct, and laborers and transport and everything like that. But what they are saying is by 2030, where it's an office-based environment, you're essentially going to be saying 100% of offices are going to have a virtual workplace. And when you think about that and you deconstruct that down, that all comes down to a full stack developer. And this is what I love about this space. You're in the future going to have office renovations that are virtual. You're no longer going to need your carpenter, your plumber, and your electrician. You're going to need your full stack developer. So when you talk about the future and what you can build in this space, yes, there's coding, but you're going to need creativity. You're going to need problem solving. You're going to need all of those soft skills to really pull it all together and have that creative mind to be like, oh my gosh, this is what I can see. Now I need to actually design that, build my back end, put the front end on it so that I can then explore and enter that universe. So to clarify, I simplified that significantly, but when you talk about an end-to-end flow, to break it down to that level just makes it so much more intuitively and naturally able to engage with what that process could look like for you. So if I speak, specifically around Australia, because that's obviously a very global outlook, and, I love that Leia's here from Israel, because it really does show that we're all going to be connecting globally now and into the future in such a way that it feels like you're face to face. I'm actually at a virtual reality hub right now. My team are in the background in a virtual reality meeting, so that's why I've got noise in the background. When we look locally and you look at the IT industry and the professional services industry, and you look at the growth of that sector over the last 20 years, it's growing by 2.5%. Now, that might sound small, but the only other industry that is faster growing is the healthcare industry, and that's at 44.5%. Now, you might go, wow, okay, look at that. You've got it as the second largest growing industry in Australia. And then you look at something like manufacturing and you go, well, the manufacturing industry is actually decreased by 4.9% over the last 20 years. What's interesting in relation to that is if you actually have a look at the contribution to GDP over in the last quarter, so September 21 for Australia, the manufacturing industry contributed 6% to Australia's GDP. Now, if over the last 20 years, the workforce has retracted by 4.9%, but it's one of the top 5 contributors to our national GDP, which is our gross domestic product, what we're actually talking about is the automation and robotics that has improved the manufacturing industry to still make it a major contributor within the economy in Australia. And the significance of that and importance of roles like full stack developers in the background that build all of this out to continue contributing within industry is hugely significant. So from that side of things, it's really that element to go, this is critical. It's critical to the future of industry and the future of Australia. And that's why job prospects are, so high within this space, which then kind of goes into job outlook. And from a national, we've got a National Skills Commission in Australia. And we've got what's called a skills priority list. So it identifies all our shortages. And this was kind of mentioned earlier, where technology workers account for 4 of the top occupations within Australia that are on the skills shortage list. So what we know is that 4 of those roles, being your developer, programmer, your software engineer, your ICT security specialist, and your ICT project manager, there's going to be national skills shortages currently, but into the future. So we know that there is a shortage and a high demand in the future, which means that as you come out of this, that 70% of you will be able to get a job within the first 2 months is actually very realistic, because that's what our current statistics at the national government level are showing us. And what we know is this is an emerging occupation, which means the government still doesn't actually have full statistics on it. And we've got to go out to industry and our major publicly listed companies to get that data. So if the government's saying there's a skills shortage and they're kind of behind on pulling that data together, you know that number's bigger than what the government's currently reporting. So your job prospects are huge. We also have a look at the fact that, when if this is specific to WA, I tried to find national, but specifically in WA, 67% of our professional vacancies are currently being filled, with the remaining 33% staying vacant. And of those 67%, only 19.5% of applicants are actually qualified. So even when you come out of this program, if you go into that and you're like, oh my gosh, but there's so many people applying for jobs, well, you're qualified. And actually of the applicants, you're only up against the other 20% that have applied. So if there's only 8 people that have applied, you're only up against one other person. So your odds of actually getting that job, again, really, really high. And like I said before, augmentation will trump automation. I love that saying. It's like one of my favorites, just because that whole virtual reality and being in that metaverse is here and it's now. And actually being a part of the group to help build that is something I'm hugely excited about and hugely passionate about. So doing a course like this is definitely your first step. So when it comes to pay, because that's important, everyone actually does care about pay. Yes, this, you jump into this field, and earlier we said, pay average salary in this field is $117,000. What I think is really interesting is then when you overlay that by all your capital cities or your major hubs and centres, if you want to move to Canberra, you're going to be earning a hot red dollar. But there's nowhere really nationally where you're going to be earning less than $100,000 coming out of this course and then getting to be passionate and creative and, really building into something that everyone's going to be able to contribute and interact in. There is definitely a lot of pull to come into this industry. And I guess for me, I'm clearly passionate, and I clearly value this space. But if, and hopefully I haven't talked over because I know that I tend to contribute a lot in these ways.
Charlene, we're absolutely loving it. Please continue.
Okay. I obviously gave my context and my history. I've gone from HR to tech. Within my team, just as an example, and Tristan said, I had permission to share this. Tristan's my new graduate. He recently went through a similar program, and coming out of that program, he got to present to a group of industry experts such as myself and other companies. And he, as part of his program, had built facial recognition software. And I immediately nabbed him. I was like, I need that guy. So we went and had coffee. When I found out more about him, he's a hairdresser by trade. So he's been a hairdresser for the last 15 years. He's just turned, I think it's 13 years. He's just turned 30. And he has changed from being a hairdresser into a full stack developer. And honestly, he is a gun. His creativity and what he can build and what he can design, and he's a hairdresser. So I feel like Tristan is the ultimate example of someone who can change field, and he loves every day. He loves coming into the office. So it's really that, if I'm an example and Tristan's an example, I hope, anyone else on the call is really kind of passionate about understanding there's so much more than just coding on a computer on late nights. It's a really, really amazing field to work in.